Welcome to Texas and the Civil War. This is for Mr. Eads' History 1, U.S. History to 1865 class. Enjoy! If you are in this class, please get the review sheets that go along with this. They'll only help you out. If you're not in this class and you just enjoyed Texas and the Civil War, thank you for watching. Although there was not a major battle fought in Texas, and the Union never captured any territory within Texas, that does not mean that the Civil War did not affect Texas. In fact, Texas is an interesting place to be during the Civil War. First, the Texas Troubles. In 1860, a wave of panic about abolitionist-inspired slave rebellion swept the state. The Texas Troubles began with a series of fires in Dallas and other North Texas towns, including Denton. Although the fires probably resulted from the spontaneous ignition of a new type of phosphorus match, several slaves were forced to confess to charges of arson. Charles Pryor, the editor of the Dallas Herald, said, "It is better for us to hang 99 innocent, suspicious men than to let one guilty one pass." In Gone to Texas, A History of the Lone Star State, historian Randolph B. Campbell stated that the Texas Troubles demonstrated the mood of Texans before the war even began. Securing the northern and western boundaries. After seceding, the first task that Confederate Texas faced was securing the northern boundary. Commanded by Colonel William Young of Cook County, the 11th Texas Cavalry took command of Forts Washita, Arbuckle, and Cobb in the Indian Territory, now known as Oklahoma. Lieutenant Colonel John R. Baylor and the 2nd Texas Mounted Rifles occupied the town of Asilla in the New Mexico Territory, on the Rio Grande near present-day Las Cruces. Baylor then created the Confederate Territory of Arizona. President Jefferson Davis commanded Henry Sibley to take 3 regiments of Texas cavalry to conquer all of New Mexico, Colorado, and California. Sibley won a victory at Valverde and occupied Albuquerque and Santa Fe, but lost the confidence of his men. Thus, Sibley decided to retreat to Texas, despite defeating the Union at the Battle of Glorieta Pass in New Mexico. Because of Sibley's decision, some historians call the Battle of Glorieta Pass the Gettysburg of the West. Defending the Gulf of Mexico. Confederate Texas also had to defend its southern border as well, since the Gulf of Mexico played in the General Winfield Scott's Anaconda Plan. The Union tried to invade Texas 4 times from the Gulf, at the ports of Galveston, Sabine Pass, and Brownsville. The Confederates defeated them each time. On October 4, 1862, Union troops occupied the town of Galveston. They had found Galveston defenseless, as the commander of the District of Texas had ordered all artillery to the mainland, because he believed that it was impossible to prevent a landing at Galveston. On January 1, 1863, Confederates under the command of General John B. Magruder retook the city, and Galveston remained in Confederate hands until June 19, 1865, this date being the famous Juneteenth date, when Galveston slaves were told that they were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. One of the first Federal naval officers killed in the retaking of Galveston was Lieutenant Commander Edward Lee. His father, Lieutenant Colonel Albert Lee, served on Magruder's staff. Thus, here's a classic case of a father on one side, a son on the other. On January 2nd, the Confederate father presided over the Federal son's funeral. In September 1863, Union General Nathaniel P. Banks attempted to invade Texas at the mouth of the Sabine River. 5,000 troops were sent to take Fort Griffin on Sabine Pass. Confederate Lieutenant Richard Dick Dowling stopped the advance. Before the war, Dowling had been a bartender in Houston, who now led artillery. Banks' next attempt to invade Texas also failed, after Banks lost at the Battle of Opelousas, Louisiana. This attempt is known as the Texas Overland Expedition. The Red River Campaign, March to April 1864. Banks' third attempt to capture Texas involved a plan to invade Texas from northern Louisiana via the Red River. By going this way, Banks could disrupt the command center of the Trans-Mississippi, which was headquartered at Shreveport, Louisiana. Secondary goals included capturing the Confederate governments of Louisiana, which was also at Shreveport, and Missouri, which was located in Marshall, Texas, and confiscating an estimated 150,000 bales of cotton, with which Banks could sell to New England merchants. As Banks' troops advanced up the river from New Orleans, they were supported by Admiral David D. Porter's flotilla of gunboats. In fact, it was the largest flotilla to participate in any inland water expeditions during the Civil War. Because of low water levels, Banks lost naval support at Alexandria. At Grandicourt, near Natchitoches, Banks abandoned the river altogether. Opposing Banks in the defense of Confederate Louisiana, and hence Texas, was Lieutenant General Richard Taylor and 7,000 Confederates, including Walker's Texas Division. Taylor was the son of former President Zachary Taylor and a son-in-law of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Walker's Texas Division had tried to keep Vicksburg from falling into Union hands. Because this unit could cover long distance in a short amount of time, Walker's Texas Division was also known as the Greyhound Division. On April 8, 1864, Taylor forced Banks into battle in the field south of Mansfield, Louisiana. In the Battle of Mansfield, and in the north, Sabine Crossroads, Taylor shattered Banks' offensive against Texas. Banks lost 20% of his men before retreating. Taylor pursued Banks to Pleasant Hill, where Banks was able to defeat Taylor and retreat back to New Orleans. The significance of the Red River Campaign is that it was the last major offensive that the Union made against Texas. It was also the last major Confederate victory of the war. Hence, one reason this campaign is not mentioned in your overall survey history books. The Battle of Palmetto Ranch, May 13, 1865. Texas also witnessed the last battle of the Civil War, as it took time for the news of the surrender of Appomattox to reach Texans. On May 13, 1865, Confederates under the command of Colonel Rip Ford, later a famous Texas Ranger, routed a unit of Federal soldiers who had crossed over to Texas from Brazos Island. Thus, the last battle of the war was a Confederate victory. The Civil War did not affect Texas's economy. Texas produced enough food and raised enough livestock to feed the population at home and the Confederate army in the field until the Union closed supply lines. Hence, one reason Vicksburg is so important. The Civil War did not dampen the worldwide demand for cotton, as Texans found ways to get cotton past the Union's blockade of the Gulf of Mexico. Slavery was not disrupted, as Union troops did not come far enough into Texas to announce the Emancipation Proclamation. In fact, the slave population in Texas increased during the war as Eastern slaveholders shipped their slaves to Texas. The biggest challenge Texas faced was the loss of soldiers. Approximately 20 to 25% of Texas soldiers died while serving. One unit, Hood's Texas Brigade, lost 82% of its 226 men at the Battle of Antietam, which was the most of any Confederate regiment on the bloodiest day of the Civil War. Texans served in the Confederate Army at the battles of Shiloh, Vicksburg, Gettysburg, Chattanooga, and in the Wilderness Campaign. The Texas Brigade also served in General Robert E. Lee's rear guard at Appomattox. During the Civil War, female settlers faced greater dangers from Indian raiders than before the war. They had also had the pressure of managing farms and plantations and supervising slaves. And last, women faced the fear that their loved ones, whether it be fathers, sons, or husbands, would not be coming home. Thank you for watching this video on Texas and the Civil War, and for my students, may the force be with you on your next exam.